What if the gods we worship today weren't the first? What if the omnipotent deities of scriptures, cathedrals, and mosques came long after something far older? Beings so vast, so potent, so elemental that their stories were whispered long before writing, before empires, before the very concept of religion itself. In the shadows of history, across ancient deserts, forests, and stars, there were once gods who walked with humans, who shaped not just belief, but biology, not just morality, but matter. And yet, as time moved forward, these gods disappeared, not because they lacked power, but because their power was too great to control. These were the gods before God. Before Yahweh thundered from Mount Sinai, before Allah dictated to Muhammad, before even Zeus ruled Mount Olympus, or Odin stalked the 9 realms. There were divine beings older than myth, older than memory. They were not distant, judgmental fathers in the sky. They were creators, destroyers, mothers, messengers, architects of reality itself. Some came from the stars, others emerged from the womb of the earth. They were worshipped not through fear, but through resonance. Humans didn't just bow to them, they lived with them, spoke with them, embodied them. But something changed. As civilizations grew and power centralized, these ancient gods became threats. Their freedom became rebellion. Their presence challenged the new hierarchies built on obedience, conformity, and spiritual dependency. New religions didn't just offer new truths, they declared war on old ones. Priests replaced prophets. Temples replaced forests. The sacred was taken from the people and locked behind altars and books. And slowly the forbidden gods, those who spoke through stars and rivers and dreams, were labeled as demons, dismissed as myths, or erased entirely from the record. Yet the question remains, why were they erased? What did they represent that was so dangerous? And what remnants of their presence still echo in our collective memory, our DNA, our dreams? This journey is not just about ancient mythology. It's about spiritual amnesia. It's about forbidden knowledge, silenced truths, and the forces that try to disconnect us from something powerful, raw, and deeply human. Today we begin a journey to remember the forgotten, to trace the outlines of those ancient, sacred figures, beings of immense power, presence, and mystery, the gods before God, the ones they tried to erase. To understand the gods that came before history, we must first redefine what God meant to ancient people. In the modern world, gods are often seen as omnipotent judges, remote, all-powerful, singular beings who rule from the heavens with absolute authority. But in the deep ancestral past, the idea of God was far more fluid, intimate, and multidimensional. These weren't distant creators separated from the world. They were forces that moved through it. Gods were rivers and winds, stars and thunder, ancestors and dreams. They were living principles, cosmic intelligences, energies that could be felt, called upon, and sometimes even embodied. To call something a god in those ancient times wasn't to place it above you on a throne. It was to recognize its sacred function in the great web of existence. A tree that healed wounds, a star that guided migrations, a spirit that whispered truth in trance. These were all aspects of the divine. Ancient people didn't reduce God to doctrine. They experienced divinity in cycles, in seasons, in the rhythm of nature and the pulse of their own breath. The divine was not singular. It was plural, relational, alive. These beings were not limited to one face or name. They appeared differently in different lands, yet carried the same essence. In some traditions, they were described as serpent beings who brought knowledge. In others, they were twin spirits from the stars, or ancestral mothers who birthed creation from clay and fire. These weren't myths in the way we use the word today. They were memories encoded in ritual, song, and story. And though many of these cultures had no written language, they passed down these stories with astonishing precision through oral tradition. Oral tradition was not just storytelling, it was sacred preservation. Elders became living libraries. Songs carried the names of the gods. Dances reenacted cosmic events. Rituals encoded truths about the cosmos, morality, and humanity's place in the world. These traditions weren't static either. They evolved, adapted, and folded new experiences into ancient frameworks. But always, they held the core belief that the world was alive and that divine forces moved within it. Even now, in places where the old gods were outlawed, mocked, or demonized, the stories persist. In lullabies, in chants, in secret rites held under full moons. The memory of these beings, these cosmic forces called gods, lives on. Not just in culture, but in the bones of those who remember. The Anunnaki, translated as those who came down from the heavens, are some of the most mysterious and provocative figures in ancient mythology. Emerging from the Sumerian civilization, one of the oldest recorded cultures on Earth, the Anunnaki are described in ancient clay tablets not as metaphors or fairy tales, but as real beings who interacted directly with humanity. In these texts, the Anunnaki were not mere spiritual archetypes. They were creators, engineers, rulers, powerful entities said to have shaped human civilization from its very beginning. According to the Sumerian records, the Anunnaki descended from the heavens to earth in a time before time, when humans were still primitive and unformed. It was they who gave structure to the world. It was they who established order, granted knowledge, and even, in some accounts, genetically modified early humans to become a working, thinking species. They are often associated with the myth of Enki and Enlil, two rival beings with opposing agendas, one seeking to enlighten and guide humanity, the other seeking control and subservience. The stories depict the Anunnaki as advanced beings with knowledge of astronomy, agriculture, metallurgy, and medicine. Sciences far ahead of their time. But beyond their roles as culture bringers, the Anunnaki were intimately tied to kingship. In ancient Mesopotamia, the legitimacy of a ruler was said to come not from divine inspiration, but from direct descent or approval from the Anunnaki themselves. Temples and ziggurats were not just religious centers. They were landing platforms, meeting grounds, energy hubs where priests, scribes, and kings would communicate with these sky beings. Bloodlines were sacred not merely for their lineage, but for their supposed Anunnaki connection. This divine right to rule formed the basis of early monarchies and may have echoed into later concepts of divine kingship across other cultures. Many have asked the inevitable question: were the Anunnaki real? Were they ancient astronauts, as some theorists suggest, beings from another planet, perhaps Nibiru or Sirius, who seeded humanity and guided its evolution? Or were they deeply symbolic representations of archetypal forces, sky and earth, light and dark, creation and destruction? Perhaps the most compelling answer is both. In ancient cultures, symbolism and literal experience were not separated. The gods could be both physical and spiritual, both seen in vision and encountered in the world. The Anunnaki could have been beings of flesh, spirit, or light, or all three depending on how consciousness was attuned. What is undeniable, however, is that their influence has lingered. Their stories spread beyond Sumer into Babylon, Assyria, and eventually even into Greek and Abrahamic myths. The idea of beings descending from the sky, giving knowledge, mixing with humans, and then vanishing, only to be remembered in fragments, is a recurring pattern. Whether we call them angels, Nephilim, Watchers, or Anunnaki, the core narrative remains. There were once divine beings who walked among us, who altered the trajectory of humanity, and who were eventually erased or hidden by rising powers. The question we must ask is why? Why would these stories be downplayed or dismissed as myth? What danger lies in the belief that our origin came not from chaos, but from contact? That perhaps the earliest chapters of human history were co-authored by intelligences greater than our own. These are not comfortable ideas for institutional religion or empire. They challenge the narrative of human uniqueness. They question the ownership of truth. And most of all, they awaken something primal. A sense that we are more than what we've been told. Today, the name Anunnaki is often dismissed by mainstream historians, yet it survives in whispers, in ancient tablets, in the deep subconscious of humanity. Whether literal sky beings or encoded metaphors for cosmic intelligence, the Anunnaki represent a lost chapter in the spiritual history of our species. A chapter that suggests we did not climb from the mud alone, but were helped, shaped, and perhaps even governed by those who came before us. Those who fell from the sky. High in the cliffs of Mali, West Africa, lives a people whose cosmology has baffled astronomers and mystics alike, the Dogon. Their spiritual system is a vast and intricate tapestry woven with stories of creation, sacred geometry, cosmic duality, and extraterrestrial origins. At the heart of Dogon, spirituality is an astonishing knowledge of the Sirius star system, particularly Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye and only confirmed by modern science in the 20th century. Yet the Dogon knew of its existence, its orbit, and its density long before telescopes could prove it. This was not guesswork. It was part of the oral tradition handed down for generations with precise detail. According to the Dogon, the Sirius system is the origin of creation and the source of their sacred knowledge. They speak of beings called the Nomo, twin, amphibious spirits who came from the star Sirius to bring order to the chaos of the earth. The Nomo were not simply gods, they were cosmic engineers, teachers, and guardians. They descended from the heavens in a vessel that spun and landed with great noise and fire. Upon arrival, they began the work of structuring human life, culture, and rhythm. The Dogon described the Nomo as having dual aspects, male and female, water and spirit, form and energy, representing the cosmic necessity of balance in all things. The Dogon creation story begins not with the earth, but with the stars. Ama, the supreme god, is the original creator, a divine intelligence that began the unfolding of reality. From Ama came the twin Nomo, who brought the world into harmony. The Dogon's understanding of cosmology is expressed through sacred symbols, sand drawings, and masks used in ritual ceremonies. These symbols mirror patterns found in nature: spirals, double helices, fractals, and resonate deeply with modern scientific concepts like DNA structure and orbital mechanics. It's as if their spiritual language was a form of sacred mathematics. Truths encoded not in equations, but in rhythm, art, and myth. What truly challenges conventional understanding is the question of how the Dogon came to possess this knowledge. How did a pre-literate society, isolated geographically and untouched by modern astronomy, know about Sirius B's orbit, mass, and existence? They even described a third star, Sirius C, long before its consideration by scientists. Western anthropologists have attempted to explain it away, some claiming the Dogon must have absorbed the knowledge from contact with Europeans. But the Dogon elders insist their teachings are far older, passed down from priest to priest, lineage to lineage, far before any colonial encounter. The Dogon system is not just about stars. It's a complete cosmology, one that includes agriculture, social structure, moral law, and ritual life, all aligned with celestial patterns. The timing of their ceremonies, the construction of their dwellings, even the design of their masks, all correspond to astronomical and metaphysical principles. The physical world is seen as an echo of the spiritual cosmos. To plant, harvest, or marry without consulting the stars would be to go against the very rhythm of existence. Their ceremonies, particularly the Sigui, a ritual that occurs once every 60 years, are encoded with astronomical precision, tracking the movement of Sirius and aligning the community with cosmic cycles. The Dogon see the human being not as a separate entity from the cosmos, but as a microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. The body mirrors the stars. The soul echoes the constellations. Life is not random. It is patterned, designed, sacred. In a world that prides itself on scientific progress yet suffers from spiritual disconnection, the Dogon remind us that wisdom does not always wear a lab coat. That knowledge is not confined to universities, and that perhaps the oldest truths come not from looking forward, but from remembering what was always there, written in the sky, kept alive through story, and guarded by those who never forgot how to listen to the stars. In the spiritual cosmos of the Igbo people of southeastern Nigeria, divinity is not a singular throne in the sky. It is a vast, interconnected system rooted in nature, ancestry, and personal alignment. At the center of this system stands Chukwu, the supreme source, the all-encompassing force from which everything flows. Chukwu is not a god in the limited sense, but the totality of existence itself, formless, beyond gender, and beyond direct worship. Instead of demanding submission, Chukwu manifests through a network of divine forces known as lesser deities, each representing a facet of creation, justice, nature, or the individual self. These are not rivals to Chukwu, but expressions of it, streams flowing from a boundless ocean. Among these divine extensions is Allah, the earth goddess, and one of the most venerated spirits in Igbo tradition. Allah governs morality, fertility, and the underworld where ancestors dwell. She is the womb of the world and the final resting place of all life. To offend Allah is to disrupt the balance of life itself. She is not feared, but deeply respected because she holds the laws of truth and reciprocity. Her shrines are found in sacred groves, tended to by priestesses and elders who interpret her will through nature and dream. Women in Igbo culture, seen as reflections of Allah, often held sacred and political authority, a stark contrast to later patriarchal religious systems. At the heart of Igbo ethics is Ofona Ogu, the spiritual principles of truth and justice. Ofo represents cosmic authority, while Ogu is the purity of personal intent. Together they form the foundation of Igbo moral life. A person who aligns with Ofona Ogu walks with clarity, confidence, and divine backing. Wrongdoing is not just a legal offense, it's rupture in the cosmic order. Yet unlike modern systems of punishment, the Igbo view morality as restorative. Rituals are performed not to appease an angry god, but to cleanse the individual and restore balance to the community and the spirit world. Every person is also believed to be born with a chi, a personal spiritual essence assigned to them by Chukwu. Your chi is your spiritual double, your life's companion, your unique path. It is not controlled by fate, but guided by choice. A person in harmony with their chi is said to be in alignment with their destiny, able to navigate life with purpose and power. To consult one's chi is to enter a deep relationship with the divine aspect of yourself, without a need for intermediaries, temples, or institutional permission. But when colonialism arrived in Igbo land, bringing with it Christianity and Western ideology, this intricate spiritual system was declared evil. Chukwu was rebranded as God, but stripped of context and layered meaning. Allah and other deities were called demons or idols. Sacred groves were cut down. All 4 staffs were confiscated. Priests and priestesses were persecuted or forced to convert. The spiritual autonomy of the Igbo was replaced with a rigid doctrine that emphasized sin, submission, and salvation through external authority. The new religion offered heaven but condemned the earth. It demanded faith but silenced intuition. Christian missionaries did not merely bring a new religion, they carried a cultural erasure. The drum became noise. The shrine became superstition. The ancestral altar became a symbol of backwardness. And yet, the old ways did not die. They hid in plain sight. In naming ceremonies, in burial rites, in the way elders speak of chi and dreams and justice. Today, many Igbo people identify as Christians, but the bones of their ancestors still echo with the old language. The rituals may be quieter now, but the spirit behind them remains. The Igbo cosmology reminds us that the divine is not somewhere far away. It is right here in the soil, the breath, the conscience, and the blood. It teaches that justice is not a system, but a balance. That morality is not fear of hell, but loyalty to truth. And that salvation is not in someone else's hands. It lives within your chi, waiting to be awakened, honored, and walked in every step of your life. Across the vast tapestry of Africa, from the shores of the Atlantic to the Great Lakes and the southern valleys, there exists a stunning diversity of spiritual systems, each with its own pantheon of gods, each rooted deeply in land, ancestry, and the cycles of life. The Yoruba people call upon the Orisha, divine energies that govern everything from lightning to rivers, creativity to justice. In the Home and across West Africa, the Vodun spirits embody natural forces, familial legacies, and elemental wisdom. The Dinka people of Sudan revere Nialik, the sky god, alongside divine forces of rain, fertility, and cattle. The Zulu connect with Unkulunkulu, the great ancestor, and a host of ancestral spirits who shape destiny and watch over the living. These spiritual systems were never static. They evolved, intertwined, and adapted. But their essence remained rooted in balance, in respect for nature, and in the intimate relationship between the divine and the daily life of the people. These gods were not abstract concepts or inaccessible deities. They were alive in ceremony, dance, trance, and dream. They appeared in thunderclaps, spoke through diviners, and were honored with offerings of kola nut, water, song, and fire. The African pantheon was vast and decentralized, fluid enough to accommodate difference, yet strong enough to bind communities together. They offered no singular prophet, no one-size-fits-all doctrine, no eternal damnation. What they offered was a relationship with the earth, with spirit, with self, and with the community. But to colonial powers, this spiritual freedom was a direct threat. European empires arrived not just with guns and trade, but with crosses and creeds. They came determined not only to extract resources, but to replace entire ways of seeing the world. African gods, so deeply woven into daily life, were labeled demons, their priests called witches, their rituals forbidden or ridiculed. Shrines were destroyed. Sacred masks were stolen and displayed in museums. And in the most insidious twist, many African gods were not just erased, they were repackaged. In the Caribbean and the Americas, where enslaved Africans were transported by the millions, the Orisha and Vodun spirits traveled in chains and survived in disguise. The thunder god Shango became Saint Barbara. The river goddess Ocean became Our Lady of Charity. Legba, the guardian of crossroads, was recast as Saint Peter. These substitutions weren't just clever, they were survival. In the face of brutal repression, African peoples cloaked their deities in Catholic robes to keep their spirits alive. But in doing so, something was lost. The gods were no longer honored in their own names, on their own terms. Their stories were bent to fit foreign narratives. Their power filtered through the lens of fear and domination. Why were these gods so dangerous to empire? Because they taught that power was not centralized, that the divine did not belong to a church, a king, or a book, but to the people. They taught that a woman could speak to the gods as easily as a man, that justice came not from colonizers, but from ancestors, that healing was found not in hospitals, but in herbs, in rhythm, in ritual. These systems encourage self-knowledge, community accountability, and ecological wisdom. And for an empire built on control, hierarchy, and obedience, such ideas were revolutionary. Even today, the legacy of that erasure lingers. African spiritual systems are still dismissed as primitive, evil, or irrelevant. Hollywood reduces them to horror tropes. Textbooks ignore them altogether. And yet, they continue. Alive in the diaspora, revived by scholars, remembered in ceremonies whispered behind closed doors. The gods have not left. They have simply waited, hidden in plain sight, until the world is ready to listen again. African deities were never just spirits. They were systems of knowledge, resilience, and power. Their colonization was not accidental. It was strategic, because in them lay the keys to a liberated humanity. And in remembering them, we don't just reclaim our history, we reclaim our future. The gods of ancient Africa, Mesopotamia, and indigenous civilizations across the world weren't simply forgotten, they were deliberately erased. Their disappearance wasn't the result of spiritual evolution or natural cultural decline. It was a calculated dismantling driven by systems that feared what these gods represented, a self-empowered spirituality. Unlike the hierarchical religions that rose in their place, these ancient systems taught that divine access was not a privilege granted by institutions, but a birthright. Every person could speak to spirit, dream with ancestors, heal with plants, and live in balance with the earth. That kind of spiritual autonomy posed a profound threat to powers built on obedience and dependency. To remove that autonomy, the first attack came through language. Indigenous names for deities were replaced or mistranslated. Chukwu became an abstract god. Orisha were called demons. Nomo were dismissed as myth. Colonizers controlled what could be said, and therefore what could be remembered. Then came the schools, colonial and missionary education systems that taught children to be ashamed of their ancestral knowledge, to laugh at their grandparents' stories, to see their culture as backward and their gods as false. Over time, generations were raised who feared what their ancestors revered. The drum became a threat, the shrine a superstition. Fear was the most effective tool. Fear of hell, fear of exile, fear of madness. Rituals once meant to bring healing and harmony were now seen as gateways to danger. People abandoned them not because they stopped believing, but because they were terrified of what belief might cost. And this fear was reinforced by religious institutions that positioned themselves as the sole custodians of truth. Churches and mosques replaced sacred groves. Holy books replaced oral tradition. Priests and imams became the new intermediaries between man and the divine. The people no longer needed to speak to their ancestors. They were told to pray to foreign gods, in foreign languages, in foreign ways. This wasn't just spiritual conquest, it was psychological warfare. The gods were erased not only from temples, but from memory. And in their place came systems designed not to awaken, but to control. Systems that demanded belief but discouraged knowing. That promised salvation but severed identity. And yet, the memory endures. Faint but unbroken. Because what is divine cannot be destroyed, only buried, waiting to rise. The gods of the old world never died. They were buried, not in graves but in silence, in the forgetting forced upon generations through conquest, conversion, and colonization. But like seeds beneath the soil, these gods, these cosmic forces, these ancestral intelligences have never stopped growing. They whisper in dreams, they flicker through rituals, they echo in chants still sung under breath in places the modern world overlooks. Their names, though once forbidden, still hold power. Their symbols, though once erased, still find their way into art, into stories, into memory. They live in the rhythm of drums, in the curves of the earth, in the gaze of elders who have never fully forgotten. To return to the forbidden gods is not to regress. It is to remember, to realign, to reclaim what was once sacred, what was once ours. It is to walk again the old paths, not with blind faith, but with conscious reverence. These systems were not relics of a primitive past. They were complex, ethical, ecological, and cosmic blueprints for living in balance with the world. They gave us truth without fear, morality without shame, and divinity without separation. They taught that we are not broken beings in need of saving. We are divine expressions of a living universe. The gods that humans tried to erase are rising again, not in rebellion, but in remembrance. Their return is not about tearing down modern religion, but about offering an alternative, a path back to soul, to earth, to balance. And that path begins not in a temple or book, but within you. It begins with questions, with curiosity, with the courage to listen to what was once silenced, because these beings are not distant, they are close, closer than breath, older than words, waiting not to be worshipped but to be remembered. Thank you for walking this journey. Thank you for listening, not just with your ears, but with your spirit. If something in this story felt familiar, if a name, an image, a feeling stirred deep in your soul, it may not be coincidence. It may be memory, ancestral memory, echoes of gods who once walked with us and who now wait for us to walk again with them. Thank you for being part of this reawakening. Thank you for remembering.